What does a locker room baptism look like? So can we go back to your childhood a little bit and growing up? What role did football play in your life when you were little and kind of dreaming?
Yeah. Football. I mean, I have a picture of myself, I think from like 4 years old when like one of my first gifts was a football. And
That's awesome.
my father played football at University of Maryland. And so like many young boys, I wanted to be like my dad. So I always grew up wanting to play football. I remember playing football in the street in Norfolk, Virginia. We play on the concrete and then tackle each other on the sideline where there was grass. But
Make sure to tackle where it's soft.
Exactly. So football was always I knew I wanted to play, especially in college, because my dad played in college. And then as I got older, obviously, played college football, saw people go to the NFL, started thinking about the NFL. But I remember, actually, I don't even remember this, but it has been told to me that as a kid, I would get in the closet and my dad would say, now starting for the Washington Redskins, number 56, Benjamin Watson. And I'd run out of the closet like I'm running out, for a game. And
the tunnel, yeah. Oh, that's so
run out
cool.
the tunnel. Yeah. So just a lot of memories. My father would do like chapel services for local high school teams as well as college and some NFL teams. And I remember tagging along with him and just being enamored by players and just by the game.
I read somewhere that your parents said that as a child you talked about wanting to be a football player and a missionary when you grew up. That's an amazing kind of high level sort of goal to have at a young age. What was happening in your life that you think led to those being your two goals?
Yeah, well, the football thing, I kind of explained that, just loving the game, loving to watch
coming out of the closet with your dad announcing you. Yeah,
exactly, playing it all the time. And then the missionary piece, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my father actually led me to the Lord, and going to church and seeing how my father and mother served people, loved people, shared the love of Christ with people. I knew some missionaries, as in overseas, but also understood that even here domestically, we're all, as believers called to be sort of missionaries wherever we are. And so I don't even remember saying that. Again, that's one of those things that was told to me when that happened when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that I had a heart for sport, a heart especially for football. And I always could see how football and faith were married together. But I grew up going to those types of camps where my dad would be like the speaker for the week. We'd all 6 of us kids would get in the little car, and those were kind of our family vacations, going to see my dad speak at a Christian athlete camp. And so I always saw sports as important in of itself, but also as a platform to do good and to share the love of Christ with people in any way and in any place that you could.
Why is football specifically sort of a good platform for that?
Well, sports is a common language globally. I mean, we just last year or a couple of years ago, I guess it was last summer, the Olympics, and we as an entire world kind of got quiet during the summer as we watched Olympians, and we were able to enjoy the prospect of sport. I think also sports, not necessarily sports brings people together in that way, and that we're able to cheer for our team. I see your terrible towel behind you. Like there's this kind of familiar aspect of everybody cheering for this team. But also I think within locker rooms, there's an aspect of respect and of humanity that you don't necessarily find outside of the locker room. And what I mean by that is when you're going to work every day with a bunch of other guys in the NFL, this 53-man roster, guys come from different places, they have different backgrounds, but you have this shared humanity because you've bled and sweat with each other, you respect each other even if you have differences. And as a believer, there are always certain people of faith on my teams. And some of my best memories in football were, like baptizing my teammates, at work, something you'll never see people do like at a Fortune 500 company. But because we're in a locker room and we see each other as people, we care about what each other's going through. We have those types of deep conversations. So there's that aspect of it. And then obviously I think, the NFL, college football, which I'm involved with now, um, is one of the biggest megaphones we have in our culture. Quite frankly, sports is, as you know, huge.
What does a locker room baptism look like?
It's fun because you got to kind of be strategic and plan it because you got meetings and you got practice and all those sorts of things.
Games and yeah.
Games, you're there, from
Yeah.
7 to 5, you're there. But it's cool because um, these are people you're kind of doing life with. And part of the doing life piece of it is, hey, I know you're not perfect, but I know you're striving for it. I can hold you accountable because we see each other every day. We see the highs and lows. We can encourage one another. Um, Practically for us, it was I was with the New Orleans Saints, and me and a teammate Josh McCown baptized a couple of our teammates that wanted to do so, and we did it right there at in the whirlpool, the whirlpool
In
right
the
in the training.
in the whirlpool in the training room. Wow.
Like actually the rehab pool. So the rehab
Okay.
pool, they'll have a treadmill in the bottom of it. You kind of take it out. You kind of do, if you're hurt, if you got a lower body injury, you can go in there and run. But right there in the training room, we announced it. These guys wanted to do it on that day, and we announced it. And some guys from the team showed up to watch. Other people were getting treatment, peeking through the window. Like it was just that, and then we kept it moving.
Do any players who aren't particularly religious, like, are they open to it? Do they like leave the room? Is there kind of a discomfort?
No, no, because like I said before, there's a common kind of respect for what everybody believes. I remember having one teammate specifically who was a Muslim, and I didn't even know until I kept walking by an area in the locker room that was actually where the kind of the sauna was and stuff like that. And I was like, is somebody in there praying? And he would go in there and pray during certain
Hmm.
times of the day when he was supposed to do so. And great, go do that. And then we're going to go out here. We're going to like execute this play on offense. There is a welcoming, I think, aspect of it. And for those who don't know, there's always chapel the night before the game or the morning of the game. It's optional. Nobody has to go. Sometimes you'll see some coaches. Sometimes you won't. It's usually a handful of players. But it just points to the fact that as human beings, we are more than muscle and bone. We're emotions. There's a spiritual aspect of it. And this kind of becomes your family, so to speak, for those 6 or so months where you're in season.
Yeah, athletes as people is really, I mean, what drives my interest in sports beyond making sure the Steelers win every weekend and my
Which is
sanity
very
check,
important.
which
Very
is
important.
very important, very important. I wanna kind of get back to your journey. I mean, college was interesting for you because you actually did a transfer during your career from Duke to Georgia. I mean, how do you think about your college playing career and the extent to which you found yourself, both as a football player and as a man?
I wish it was the transfer portal era so that I wouldn't have had to sit out that year because that year
Mhm.
was very, very difficult.
The
Coming out
transfer
of
year
high
when you
Yeah, yeah. When I transferred, yeah, I had to sit out when I went to Georgia, whereas now athletes can just play. Um, for me, coming out of high school, I, was looking at a few schools, ended up going to Duke University, new coach, had great education, all those sorts of things. And I think that part of the growing process for me was I enjoyed my tenure at Duke, even though it was a year. But I felt like I was not honest with myself as far as what I wanted out of college football, meaning the opportunity to play at the largest stage and to compete for championships, those sorts of things. I feel like I made a great decision in going to Duke University, which I'm a big proponent of on the education side. And I felt like I wanted more out of my football experience. So I ended up going to University of Georgia. As I mentioned before, I transferred. It was tough, but I learned a lot in that process about who I was and the things that were important to me. And I met my wife at Georgia. That kind of marriage of sport and faith. She was playing softball at the time. Really kind of brought us to where we are right now, being married for 20 years and having seven seven kids to show for it.
That's awesome. Big family.
Yeah, definitely. Big crazy fan. Ages 16 down to 6. The bottom two are identical twin boys.
Oh, well, nice. That's a good age range.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, then I want to ask you. I mean, you get to the New England Patriots, and you were drafted right out of a Super Bowl winning year for them, right?
Yeah.
What's it like landing in a place that, as a Steelers fan, I hate to say this, but was like, in the midst of one of the most amazing dynasties the NFL has ever seen, and getting there kind of when there had to be some sort of championship hangover, right? I mean, doesn't that isn't that always the case?
I mean, you'd think it was, and Coach Belichick would always have a stat for everything. And for example, I remember in those early meetings that we would have, he would talk about the fact that, however many teams who made the Super Bowl the year before don't make the playoffs the next year, or how many teams, that went to the conference championship don't make the conference championship the next year. And in a way, just trying to let us know that it didn't matter what you guys did last year. You have to come prepared every single year. That was kind of his mantra for my entire tenure there. But I get there in 2004. I was drafted. They had won the Super Bowl in 2003. We win it again my rookie year in 2004. I just thought that's what you did. You just win Super Bowls, and that's just what happens in the NFL. That is not how most people live their careers. But that was a tough year for me. I tore my ACL in my rookie year, and so I missed the entire year. Most of it. Wasn't able to play in the Super Bowl, even though we won. I battled a lot of perfectionism, feeling like I was not contributing. It was a hard year in a lot of ways, not just because of the injury, but because as somebody who has struggled with tying my identity to my performance, um, even as a believer and understanding, what God says about me, I still struggled with tying my identity to how well I did. And because I couldn't perform, I really, was down. My fiance at the time, was my wife now, I was a jerk to be around. Like it was just tough. And so, but I did learn, being in New England, there's a reason for the success there. Much of that reason is number 12. But there's also a standard, there's a protocol, there is, an adherence to excellence. There's the accountability piece that, playing on different teams around the league, you find out that not everybody has the same type of, accountability when they walk in the door.
Hmm.
And so those are some of the things like, the success wasn't by accident. Again, like when you got number 12, it makes a big difference. But the
Tom
success,
Brady, yeah.
yeah, the success there wasn't accidental. It was part of a process that I learned.
I think if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but your rookie year, the AFC Championship game was in Pittsburgh, and it was cold as hell, right?
Yes, it
I think I
was.
was at that game
You
with
were?
my now wife, who said after the game she's never going to a football game like after October in Pittsburgh. It was one of the coldest games in the history of Pittsburgh Steelers playoffs. I
Oh,
mean, I was
goodness.
in the stands. Beers were literally freezing
Freezing.
in our hands. But I'm not the important one here. I wonder, you talking about identity being tied to performance and being your rookie year, seeing your new team, playing for a chance at the Super Bowl. You have an injury. Where were you, and what were you feeling like?
Well, at that point, during the AFC Championship, I was watching it on TV like millions of other Americans. I was
So you
probably
didn't make the trip.
No, I didn't make the trip. I was in rehab, and when you're rehabbing an injury, um, you're on IR, injury reserve, and you're kind of on your own schedule. Like especially a major injury like a knee reconstruction, those sorts of things. You have a different rehab schedule. You're not really in team meetings. You don't travel with the team. You're on your own pace trying to get yourself back. And especially there in New England, there are very strict lines of demarcation between those who were playing and those who aren't playing. Like you felt that. You felt ostracized, so to speak, not necessarily by the players, but by the system. There wasn't this integration, come hang out on the sidelines if you can. Like, no, go up to the injured player box and you're on your schedule, and Bill, I'm dealing with the guys who can perform. That's how
And
they
is
operate.
that Belichick just not wanting distractions? Like, love you, but if you're hurt, like, I got to focus on. on the people who are
Yeah,
healthy.
yeah. I think that's part of his personality. That's part of his the way he runs his organization. That's kind of an organizational tenet. In some places it's different. In some places you see guys who are injured. Hey, if you can make it on the side, unless you're fresh off your surgery and it's dangerous for you to be on the sideline, yeah, we want you to feel like you're a part of this. And that's not what it was in New England. And so that was that was difficult for me.
That
We
had
get
to
to
add to the feeling of isolation
oh,
and
for
kind of
sure,
your
for
identity
sure.
too. Like I'm not part of this.
Definitely, definitely. It added on to that. And then you're a rookie too. And you know how it is
Trying to
when
prove yourself.
you're a rookie. Not only are you trying to prove yourself, but you're also understanding that, you're to be seen and not heard, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, it was a snowball effect for me. Very difficult. We get down to the Super Bowl in Jacksonville, and the guys on IR, we were part of some of the things, but still there was just that feeling of being separated. And so again, learning about that, kind of going through that process. I will say this: I didn't want to wear my Super Bowl ring for a long time.
Wow.
I
Why is
wouldn't wear
that?
because I felt like I didn't earn it. I felt like it was a reminder to me of like disappointment and failure of not being able to play for that whole year and the team going to win all those games in a row and me not being a part of it. So I had a Super Bowl ring, and I remember going to David. I remember going to the ring ceremony. Was at Mr. Kraft's house, in July.
Owner Bob Kraft. Yeah. I didn't know he
Exactly,
had those at his
July.
house. That's
Yeah, and he had it at his house. And every team does this. There's kind of a big, when you win a Super Bowl, that's next summer. Everybody gets their rings. It's an exciting time, and I just remember going and feeling this sense of shame almost. And again, that wasn't all from the outside. Some of that was some internal workings, again, with my own perfectionism and my self-doubt, those sorts of things that I had to struggle with. And again, my fiance at the time was with me, and I opened the ring and looked at it and put on a smile and was excited. And then I closed it up, and I didn't open that thing up for years. And
years.
years. And I remember probably the next year or a couple years later, Tom said to me, actually, no, it was pretty soon after me. He said this to me, but I still didn't take it as law. I still didn't open it back up. I still never wore it for years. I don't think I ever wore. I may have worn it once or twice in my entire first stint in New England, the whole 6 years. And I remember soon after the Super Bowl, going into the next year, I remember Tom saying something like, you're a part of this team. You're a champion just like we are. We all have like our role to play. Like, basically, don't feel like just because you didn't get on the field, you're not a Super Bowl champion. Like you are because you're part of this football team. And it still didn't totally change how I viewed things. Clearly, I still had to work through that process over years. Um, but I remember specifically him saying that about that game. So it was. I say all that to say it was a difficult process.
Was Brady like that? I mean, did he sort of have the pulse of all the players on the team and know, for example, okay, here's a rookie who I'm just sensing is feeling like he's not part of this, and I got to give him some words of encouragement?
He had an uncanny ability to be very normal, even though he's not.
Hmm.
Like, and I think even if you fast forward to the end of his career, part of the biggest challenge I think people asked about, him going to Tampa after 2019 season, going into 2020, he goes to Tampa, and like, oh, he's 40 years old or whatever it was. And I said, the skill set part of it is not the difficult part. The feeling young enough and your body is not the most difficult part. The part that's really difficult and crazy to me is that here's a guy at this age that can still get on the same level as a rookie who was born, who's half his age. Um, in my situation, here's a guy who is coming off this, at that point, I guess it was his third Super Bowl, who, with a guy who was on IR, can have a conversation with me and me still feel like he's normal, even though he can't go outside in downtown Boston because he'll be mobbed. You
Hmm.
know what I'm saying? So, so,
Yeah.
so part of, and I think that there are a lot of quarterbacks have to be that way in some respect, but most of them are not the global, almost maybe not global, but getting there, icon that he is in a lot of ways. And for him to be able to have those one-on-one conversations that are very, very genuine and honest, and encouraging, and just be like one of the guys, even though on the outside of the locker room, he's definitely not just one of the guys. That's what made him so and makes him so special in a lot of ways.
I just think about the story you just told, and that Super Bowl, and not wanting to wear the ring and sort of searching for identity. God, that so sets the stage for 2 years later. I mean, I think the play that a lot of people really remember you for, which is a playoff game when the Pats were playing in Denver, losing late. Brady throws a pass to the end zone. It's intercepted by Champ Bailey, and the Bronco defender starts just screaming 100 yards to return the interception. It looks like he's gonna score a touchdown until you enter the picture. um, can you talk me through that play and what you remember, sort of frame by frame?
Yeah, so yeah, it was a, we weren't very happy on offense because we were losing that football game. And I don't think I caught any passes, so I did have that bone to pick. Um, but it was we were on maybe the 5 or 10 yard line going in trying to score, and Tom throws the ball to the right. I'm on the left side, protecting his backside. He throws out to the right, gets intercepted. I think it was throwing to Troy Brown, gets intercepted by Champ Bailey. Now Champ Bailey is, the ultimate Georgia Bulldog. And so for a Georgia Bulldog like myself, I played with Champ's little brother, Boss. But Champ is like, in the state of Georgia, all the Georgia football lore. It's like Champ Bailey, Herschel Walker, David Pollock, obviously, but he's up there. And so when Champ gets the ball, it's like, oh man, that's Champ Bailey.
It's also
But I
fast as
think
hell, right?
that too, that
Yeah.
that too, that too. But one of those things I learned, you mentioned kind of growing up in football. One thing my father would always tell me was, whatever you do, give 100% of what you do. He always harped on giving total effort, in anything. And I could remember a time I was playing football, University of Georgia. I was on offense. There was a fumble. A guy picks up the football on the other team. He runs the ball 50 yards the other way. None of us chase him because we figured we couldn't catch him. And Coach Mark Richt made us run until we couldn't run anymore the next day. He was a head coach at Georgia. Fast forward later that season, something else happened like that. All of us started chasing the guy because you just never know. And
Hmm.
so I do think that over time, between my father and different lessons, different coaches, it had been ingrained in me, not to give up. And so in that moment, I mean, we're talking about the playoffs. Uh, what better way to try to change the outcome of the game than to try to stop a guy who's, one of the fastest players, and he, was going to score to ice the game, basically. So I ended up catching them, but they scored on the next play. It kind of didn't have the fairy tale ending, and we ended up losing the game.
But
But
still, I
really,
mean, you see him make the interception
yeah.
across the field, like you're near the end zone, but on the other end of other end of the field. And are those lessons from like your dad, college? Can you actually hear them in your mind? Like, don't give up, start sprinting, or does it just sort of happen?
They're ingrained in you, and so it's who you are at that point. And also, let's be honest, you don't want to be the guy on film that's not chasing the guy with the football either. Like, we're gonna watch this film. And so you don't want to be the guy that's like spectating. If you're going to be a spectator, you may as well get a ticket, right?
Hmm.
So you want to be the guy that's actually involved. And then it it turns into a challenge. Can I catch him? Um, can I knock him out? Can I strip the football? Can I help my football team in some way? Playoff football, the margin for error is so small. If you got 11 guys giving that type of effort, um, on any play, like, that's the difference in playoff football. There's just small mistakes here and there. And so, yes, it was all those things, but it also was, these are my teammates. You don't want to let your team down.
You're running probably full speed, like the equivalent of like 120 or 130 yards because you're having to cross the field
Yeah.
diagonally. I mean, did you think as you're sprinting that you have any chance of catching up to him?
Yeah, I did. I did. Maybe not, because this is the thing in football. You don't know what's going to happen. Like, you don't know if he is going to trip over his own player. You don't know if one of your guys is going to like slow him up. You don't know if one of your guys is going to tackle him. So in football, anything can happen. Anything can happen. And so your job is always to control what you can control. What I could control in that point in time was running as fast as I can at an angle to where if I get there, I got to figure out how to tackle this guy because I'm on offense. I don't really know how to tackle. So, but at least if I get there, I have an opportunity to do something.
I I wonder, like the thing that your father told you about giving 100%, 100% effort. It can be dismissed as one of like the most cliched things in sports. But then I look at a play like that, and you truly living it, not giving up, just full effort until the play is over. I mean, I just want to remind everyone who hears that 110% cliche, like there is deeper meaning in it and deeper lessons.
Yeah, it's about commitment, and it's commitment to yourself. Honoring the work that you put into something, but also like what's the point of doing something if you're not gonna give effort, give your all to it, like what's the point of it? And I mean, I think that goes for everything. I mean, that goes for like as a parent, why be a parent if I'm not going to engage with my kids? Like if I'm not going to, seek the best for them and pray for them and care about them. What's the point of being a husband? If you're not going to go all in, getting to know your wife, to love her, to serve her, to protect her, to provide for her, like, to swallow your pride sometimes, to be honest about your when you're upset, to engage, to solve those arguments because we're all going to have them. What's the point in that? What's the point in being an athlete if you're not willing to count the cost and you're not willing to, um, you know, do all the things in the off season and put yourself in the best position to be successful. That and that's something that we talk to our kids about, but it's something that I definitely glean from my parents.
You've written a good deal about fatherhood, and being present for your family, particularly when, like you're in a job, like yours, like mine, frankly, that can take you away from your loved ones for long stretches of time. What exactly do you mean? Like, what is the advice that you have? What does it mean to be present and be there with your family, like when you're actually physically with them?
So we got married in 2005. We waited about 3 years before we started having kids and had our first child in 2009. I remember when my wife was pregnant with our first, and I was talking to some of the guys, again, because I dealt a lot with, performance anxiety, um, the perfectionism piece with tied to football. Like, I mean, things got rough at times during my career early on, especially. Um, but we were about to have our first child, and I'm asking all the guys for advice. Like, I'm terrified. I never had a baby before. Like, I can read all the stuff. I don't know what to do. What's your advice? And I remember asking Teddy Bruschi. He was a linebacker for the Patriots, and him and his wife had a couple kids at the time. I said, "Man, what's your best piece of advice for me as a husband and as a new father?" He said, "Leave work at work." I said, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" He said, "I don't care if you pull up in the driveway and you've got to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Like when you walk in that door, you are a husband, you're a father. Like you're not the athlete, you're not the guy who works for the Patriots. Like you're not the guy that the media loves or the media hates. Like you're a husband, you're a father. So take off that hat when you get home." Now that's easier said than done because again, all of us pour so much into our occupations and rightly so. that we carry a lot of that with us. We're thinking about the meetings that we have the next day, or we're thinking about the checklist that we have, or maybe the business deal that we weren't able to close that we want to, or maybe something bad happened, and we're influenced by what's happening in our work lives. But what Teddy was saying was that as best as we can, we have to be present not only physically but also emotionally. Too
Hmm.
often as dads, we're some of us aren't present physically, so that's a problem. Some of us are present physically, but we're not present emotionally. We don't engage. Our mind is somewhere else. We're on our phone or we're thinking about something totally different than our families. And many of us aren't present or even available spiritually for our families. And so that piece of advice was huge because I mean, what's going to last? I mean, when we weigh, if you were to ask any dad or father, what's the most important thing in your life? It'd be like, oh, it's my family, it's my family. But oh, really, really, where does your energies go? Like, what are you pouring into? And while we have to work and we have to do those sorts of things, the challenge for me as a dad and for other dads is to pour yourself. Again, going back to 100% into what we say is the most important thing, which is our lives within the four walls of our home.
I'm I really appreciate your openness about this. I those Teddy Bruschi conversations sound really powerful. I mean, you're saying you were struggling with some family stuff. I mean, performance anxiety with your wife and pressures at home, and you found kind of companionship and advice from a teammate. I mean, is that level of closeness really common, even when you're at the highest level, like in the NFL?
I've found so much. Again, I've been out of the league for 5 years now. So most of my life, adult life, had been within a locker room. Um, but there is a certain sense of openness, mentorship that you see within locker rooms that I haven't experienced outside of it. And again, I think it goes back to the shared experiences, the willingness to engage with other people, challenge people, um, the love and sometimes the hate. You know, you fight with your brothers too. Everybody's not friends on a football team, but within that, you always have your group of guys. You have your companions. And so I've found that on every locker room I've been in, as I moved from team to team, there are always a couple guys that, you gravitate towards. And there's always a feeling that as you got to be one of the older players, you're not just trying to, like, as I got to be an older player, I wasn't just trying to teach the young tight ends, how to run a stick route or how to run a post or how to read coverages. Like, I was trying to invest in them from a relational, or spiritual, emotional standpoint, because we understand that the window we have together in the NFL is so short. But as you look back on it, you can see some of these guys that, they have families, they become fathers, they become husbands. Like, that's what it's about. Like, that's as you get older in the league, and Teddy was at that point was older than me. He wasn't like toward the end yet, but he took the time to invest in a guy who, played a different position, a guy he didn't really know. And I credit him with a lot of me learning about what it meant to be a father and a husband.
I wanted to ask you about 2014. That's when Michael Brown was killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. You seemed really moved by those events, and you wrote a really powerful, passionate post on Facebook when the decision came down that the officer was not guilty. I think it was like a Monday night and you were getting ready for a Monday night football game, but can you kind of take me to that game, that place, and when you learned the news from Ferguson and what your reaction was?
Yeah, but it was a Monday night. We'd actually just got done playing. We lost. I was playing with the New Orleans Saints, and we had just lost on Monday night to the Baltimore Ravens. And at that night is when the news came out that the officer would not be indicted. Officer Wilson would not be indicted in the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And that night, I remember we heard the news, and this had been something that everybody had been following for the last several months, because I believe the actual shooting happened at some point in August of that year. And this has been a summer of other shootings involving unarmed black men by police officers. Some of them were egregious. Some of them were just under circumstances that we just didn't know about. So there was a heightened sense of awareness about these things. And that evening, there were protests in Ferguson. Some of those spread to other places across the country. And I remember sitting up watching the news and just feeling a whole bunch of emotions. And so I wrote this Facebook post. Actually, I just wrote some stuff on my phone and then posted it to Facebook. And it went kind of viral from there. And basically the thrust of it was, my sadness, my anger, my fear, all those sorts of things, but also just, where do we go from here? My sympathy, just these issues that can be so complex and so layered. And so I said, I'm just going to say what I feel. And usually as athletes, you have to be careful with that because we represent our organization, we represent our
Sure.
families, we represent our cities. But I said the most honest thing I can do right now is just say how I feel, and that's what I did.
Benjamin, I think that it's the complexity and layers of what you wrote that stay with me so much because it was not like one clear message that you were sending. It was really nuanced. I mean, you were saying that you express maybe some empathy with the officer. And you've talked about since then that race is something that you feel is so much more complicated and misunderstood in our country. And just the raw feeling of you working stuff out personally and not knowing exactly what the solution is or what you need to be calling for. God, that's like so refreshing in these times where I feel like people just, jump to some soundbite or feel like they have to be absolutely clear with some message. No one actually reacts to something anymore as a human being who's confused and seeking answers. And there was something really powerful about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that. It was, after I wrote it, I remember going to work the next day and some of my teammates were like, "Hey man, my mom said that you wrote something and that I should read it. What did you write?" I was like, I just posted something. I had no idea. But I do think that obviously there are absolutes, right? Like prejudice, racism, hate, those things are wrong. And we shouldn't stand for them. Um, the way we got to where we are is complex though. And if we don't understand the history of our country, if we don't understand how neighborhoods even got to look the way that they look through legislation, those policies, those sorts of things, all those things are important in understanding where we are and how we move forward. And if we even want to move forward. And so my biggest take away from that time, what it showed me was that, there are people who are willing to have the conversation. Now, the conversation is going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people. And those people will leave and they'll exit stage left and they'll just wait for the next big moment to happen. But even as I, fast forward to kind of, what I'm doing now with, the Just Life, my podcast is like bringing in conversations and people who are engaged with justice so that we can understand what it means to live life justly every single day. Like, how do we live in a way that is fair and equitable, not only as individuals, but as institutions? Like, what does that really mean? I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to search for them. And I think there are other people that are willing to search for them and are willing to perhaps sacrifice for them if we see that as a goal, as something that's attainable and something that we should reach for.
I read somewhere you were asked why you want to just put stuff on the table and like bring people to the table to have the hard conversation. And you actually used a football analogy. I think it was about the tape that you're going over when there's a game or practice. Is it "eye in the sky, don't lie"?
Yep.
Which I think about. It's such an accountability thing. And I think back to the Champ Bailey interception, you chasing him, like saying that, like, I knew that if I didn't run at full speed, like everyone's going to see it when we go through the film the next day. But you're saying that there's an aspect of that we should all think about in life.
Yeah. The eye in the sky don't lie. That's the first thing as a matter of fact, that might have been one of the first football cliches that I heard from my father. the eye in the sky don't lie. What that means is on every practice field, I guess they still do it now, probably with the drones, but there is a camera that is watching your every move. And there's a camera. We go into the film room after practice and we watch everything. Like you can't. It's always crazy when you have a player come to the sideline and the coach will say, "Son, you blocked the wrong person. Why did you mess that up?" And he says, "I didn't mess it up. I blocked the right person." And then we all look and say, "We're gonna watch this in like 45 minutes."
Yeah, there's no way to
So
can't hide from it.
so there's no reason to lie. There's
Yeah,
no reason to lie because that's actually how we get better. Like we get better when we're able to be honest with the things we did well, the things we did poorly. That's how we get better. Um, Cowards don't like watching the film.
I
Now,
bet.
when you watch the film, um, there's a way we approach it. We approach it with the sense of, being constructive, learning from it, correcting the mistakes, not necessarily condemnation. But we're all trying to go to the same place. But cowards or people who love the status quo are those who don't want to pull the cover back and look at individually, collectively, as a nation, what the eye in the sky says. We rather hide that. And so, yeah, the eye in the sky doesn't lie, but also the eye in the sky is if we really want to improve on anything, um, that's where we start.
Sounds like a lot of it is coming to any hard conversation, being humble and being open to self-reflection and like your own mistakes, which makes you like a vulnerable participant. You can't hide from who you are and what brings you to the table. And it's not like you can pretend that you know all the answers if you've made mistakes yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Humility is huge, individually, but also I think when we talk about larger, more systemic problems, whether they be, racial policy in America or things like hunger or education or these bigger issues that we have a hard time grasping. Um, it's taking our personal identity out of it and saying, even though I didn't do something personally, what can we learn from this? Like, how does it impact all of us? Because we are as Americans, we are the collection of our country's progress and failures, our country's policies and programs and practices. Like we're all a collective product of that right now, of what's happened over the last several hundred years. And so in order for us to identify the things that are happening now and how we want to fix them, it's important to understand those things and to know those things in a way that doesn't condemn you as an individual right now, but understands that as by way of birth, we're grafted into this legacy.
You think a lot about justice on your new show. You've thought a lot about race. As you think about this football analogy, "Eye in the sky, don't lie." What is one way you think we collectively could all be doing something better when it comes to those issues and that analogy?
Um, this isn't everybody's favorite thing. Um, I get that. Some people are mathematicians. Some people like science. Uh, some people love sports. That PE was their favorite class. Count me among them. I love PE.
Hmm.
Uh, but it is important to learn our history. Um, Family histories are important, and by family history, I mean just the fact that I know that you know I was born in Norfolk, Virginia. My parents are from Norfolk, Virginia, and Washington D.C. I kind of know I know where their parents are from. Beyond that, it gets kind of fuzzy. But it gives me an anchor because I understand that's where I'm from. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. My siblings have been all over the world, living places. My kids are going to know about their aunts and uncles, so they're going to understand a little bit about themselves. Um, One thing that we all can do is dig into the history of our country, collectively. And you don't got to be a scholar. There's plenty of YouTube videos. Some of them are good, some of them aren't. But just go on the journey. Just decide, I'm going to go on a journey. Maybe with my kids this summer, we're going to go on the journey of looking into the last 20 years of American history, the last 200 years of American history, whatever it is. I think that everybody needs that because, again, the lightning rod issues, even especially when it comes to race, all of us, in many respects, are devoid of knowledge. We don't understand. And so one of the biggest ways to disarm, I mean, I go into SEC Network for college football every weekend, watch these college football games, and throughout the week, I'm able to kind of look at these teams' tendencies and kind of see what, their personnel and what they do well, what they've done poorly. And so when I get in there and I watch the game, like it's not a surprise to me when a certain team can't run the football because
Mhm.
they haven't been able to run the football. Like, because I've looked at that and I was like, if they run the football, it's going to be surprising. Kudos to them, but they're probably not going to be able to do it because they just haven't done it. And I think that collectively, as a nation, especially on issues of race, um, and by race, I mostly mean descendants of American slavery, how they've been treated, how that plays into today's narrative of economics, wages, all those sorts of things. And when those clashes happen and there's, like a Ferguson, those sorts of things, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It, it's not just about that event. It's about a host of other things, and so that's one thing I think, just being willing to dig into, a little bit of yesterday and yesteryear, meaning yesterday backwards, when it comes to this country.
Don't be shocked or surprised if you've actually done the research and understanding. I mean, you can really have a feeling for why we got there and maybe how to prevent it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And another football thing, which I didn't do very well early in my career, was to not take things personal. Um, you know, and this can go for people on different sides of whatever the issue is, but a lot of times you go in and watch the film and you play poorly and the coach is getting on you. Now, he don't need to call you out your name. That's another thing. But a lot of people don't want to take the coaching and they take it as a personal indictment on them when really we're all trying to go to the same place. And I have high expectations of you and think you can get there, but you've got to do these things differently. Like I have high expectations of our country. I have a high desire for for this for this nation. There are several things that are going on now that need to get fixed. There are several things in the future that will need to get fixed. But my idea is high. And so that's why there's the critique, because we want to go here and we can't get here unless we change these sorts of things. So it's like a calling up, not necessarily a calling out or a condemning, although you need to fix some things, but not taking those things personal because we're trying to go to a better place.
I want to finish with just a couple questions that take advantage of the different perspectives that you've had in your life and career. I mean, actually, playing football, being in the locker room, but also being a, you know, broadcaster and kind of being on the outside. But what do you wish players understood better about storytelling and the importance of sharing who they are when people are asking about that?
Meaning like sharing their personal stories or
Yeah, I mean, I just one of the things that I'm so excited about is just peeling back layers and anything I
mm,
can do to convey to athletes that there's a value in being vulnerable in kind of the sports space. That kind
yeah.
of excites me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that if I could compare it to how it used to be, I think there's been tremendous progress. I think part of that is social media. And now everybody has their own microphone and everybody can be their own journalist and share their own stories about how they feel waking up or going to sleep. Like,
Yeah, which is good and
so
bad as someone
yeah,
in the media,
exactly.
but yeah, it's true.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think that this generation of athlete is totally different than my generation of athlete. Um, as far as their openness to sharing, you know, their fears. Like I didn't have a vocabulary for the depression that I was bordering on until I went to go see a psychiatrist in year 6. Whereas kids coming into pro sports now, they've had mental health coaches. They understand that that this is a real thing, like in ways that we didn't. So I do think that they are more open now to sharing, their failures and their successes, than we were. I think that I think what it comes down to is athletes understanding that they're humans first and entertainers second, and humans have struggles that are common to humanity. Humans feel lonely at times.
Mhm.
Humans can feel defeated at times. Humans can be elated and excited, and they can feel like they are invincible, and they can sometimes feel like the walls are closing in. And there's value in that because that's common to humanity. And what sports does sometimes, especially at the highest level, is it not only separates you or incubates you from the outside, but it places you on a pedestal that is that is that no human can really handle for an extended amount of time. Like everybody at some point in their life is going to need some sort of help. And what pro sports does because of, the viewership and the money and the acclaim, and because we idolize sports in our culture, which can be great and exciting, it also places you in a position where um, you feel disconnected from the people that can help you the most.
Mm.
And so that's what I would probably encourage athletes to really struggle with, and most of them do, and they understand this. They have people around them that reaching out is not an indictment on your toughness or your ability. It just means you're a human being.
Mhm. And what would you say in the other direction? Those of us who are fans or in the media, like, what do you wish we knew more about when it comes to the locker room and behind the scenes?
um, you know, I wish that when I was in the league, we used to always talk about the fact that, well, actually, Belichick used to always mention the fact that the fans don't care about your contract. To them, you guys are all spoiled, millionaires. Like, like nobody wants to hear about the fact that you're fighting between, like, you want an extra million, and
Yeah.
this guy is like, working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet. Like nobody
Yeah.
cares.
Don't complain. You're rich. You're on the biggest stage, like, whatever.
Exactly. And there is something to that. Like there's many fans don't care about that. But also I think I do wish fans understood sometimes that there is this is business just like any other business. And so when an athlete is, especially from a contractual standpoint, is trying to, get his or her worth, market value to that athlete, this is their job, the same way anybody else's job is, and you want your market value. Now the market value is exponentially higher than what a lot of people make in some spheres and businesses, but it's not necessarily about greed. Really, it's about fairness, and respect. And also, I think, I love it when, there's been several like documentaries and things that kind of follow athletes in their home life and stuff like that. So I think that this isn't as much of an issue anymore, but just understanding like guys love their families, guys want to do right by their families. Um, they want to drop their kids off at school just like everybody else and be safe. Have a lot of the same desires as you have.
Um, Benjamin, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you talking to me. This was really enjoyable. Thank you.
No, man, thank you. I appreciate you reviving the pod and having me on, man. It was a great conversation.